And we are live with the Enterprise Month in Review. Got Brian Summer as per usual. Brian, how we doing?
Doing just fine. By the way, we had a huge thunderstorm and tornado warning going on here last night before, and the house next to me, it took out a 53-foot tall tree. The house across the street, it took about a 25-foot blue spruce
Wow.
down. The house next to it, it blew the mailbox post off level with the ground. Another house, three houses down, it took out an ornamental maple in the backyard. And I looked around all my yard, and all I've got is it tried to tump over a barbecue grill, which probably upset the possum that likes to hide under there tremendously. But anyway, I'm doing fine though.
Glad all is well, Brian. And I know that does barely compares to the excitement of the keynotes, the agentic AI keynotes you saw this spring on the road. But now we are back to try to make sense of it all, including, I think, what's going to be a potent and perhaps even controversial halftime segment reviewing
Right.
Accenture and Mary Meeker's trends reports. That's going to be really interesting. For those of you viewers who are joining the show, if you can comment and let me know that you're seeing the stream, that would be great. And we will be responding to your comments. It looks like the test was a success, says one LinkedIn user. So that's cool. Can't see your identity, but that's probably for the best. So, as usual, we do have slides, Brian. We do not
Yes, we
have we
do.
do not have a guest this week, however, because we got a lot going on. We got a lot to cover, and it's just you and me and our brilliant audience. Hello, Thomas. Nice to see you.
Thomas is apparently adopting the Texas vernacular. I'm loving that. So anyway,
Indeed, absolutely, Thomas. You're going to fit right in. I'm sure you're going to have a lot to say on the show's comments, Thomas, because you have been boiling down your road insights as well. So feel free to chime in. Oh wait, Brian, I got to stop the presses for this one. Thanks for making LinkedIn enjoyable. Yep, that is the ultimate goal here, folks. And I admit it's an unbelievable challenge, but it's one that we are fully embracing at this event. So thank you for helping because we need you to do it. So Brian, give us a quick agenda review here.
so as in typical reviews, we're going to have our cringy buzzword or whatever thing next. We're going to talk about each of us talk about our underrated enterprise stories for the month. And I'm going to go ahead and bust John right now before we get into that and just say that he cheated this month because every one of his three top stories, he put two articles. He linked on both of them. But that's okay. They're going to add to the richness of the dialogue, I'm sure. We've got the halftime special that John was alluding to, and this one's a monster, I think. We're going to cover two big AI studies that came out early this month. And we're going to talk about some of the implications for customers and just what is or isn't in these reports. And I think if you don't know that much about AI, or if you do, I really think you ought to watch this part of it for sure. I think this is probably one of the more intriguing halftime shows we've got. And then we got the usual some whiffs and stuff on the side. And I've got one about John I want to bring up in there that I don't have a slide
Oh,
for because
excellent.
it was a last minute edition. And then, of course, we want all of your comments. So flood that comment field and send us those comments right away. Thanks.
Indeed. Oh, and by the way, I'm glad the test was a success. I'm not sure what the test was, but you are here. Uh, yeah, and by the way, like one of the things we're trying to do with this show is to not just do event reports, but really try to set the tone for what we think enterprise leaders, experts, influencers, all of the above, people that care about their jobs and being successful, what they need to be watching. Because we spend a lot of time, Brian, like filing our event reports and analysis. You can catch a lot of that on Diginomica or what have you. But now's our chance to kind of say what we think folks should be paying attention to, which is not always the same as what you hear from the keynote stage. So with that in mind, buzzwords. Oh, we got playfulness. Oh yeah, I actually have this coming up later too, so I think I'm going to get a buzz ping later in the show. Brian, are we being playful now in the enterprise again?
Well, I'm seeing that pop up in a lot more HR discussions now. It's not enough that we have alignment and that we have culture and a great culture like a great yogurt has. It's not enough that we have that we've got all the attributes and bells and whistles that go with creating a great place to work. Now we have to create playfulness. And I'm not sure it's the term we really ought to be hammering on right now, given all these dire predictions of mass layoffs due to AI and other things going on in the workforce. I think what the buzzword more people would want to see is full employment, but that's just me.
Yeah, there's nothing like a round of layoffs followed by some playfulness sessions and some gamification, sort of like a musical chairs of who's going to be left standing at the office. Definitely good vibes.
Boy, there's
Uh,
an H. That's one HR best practice I hope doesn't catch on. Okay, all the employees gather in a room, and someone's like, "What's that music, that boombox doing on the table? Why is it playing Ring Around the Rosie?" And
Hey, it might be a more equitable way of moving people along into new employment than the ones that are being used now. Uh, yeah, in terms of being visible, I'm not sure why you're not visible LinkedIn user, but feel free to identify yourself if you want. Uh, and yeah, I mean, look, uh, I don't think mass layoffs are pending, but the same thing is there's a lot of reasons why organizations are in operational efficiency mode right now, including economic reasons. And I would tend to agree with you that now is not the best time to be quote unquote playing around. Yeah, we could gamify the offboarding process. That sounds great. Oh my god, Thomas, that is funny.
oh,
Oh no.
oh, that
Oh,
is that probably introduced a two Rolaids moment right there. That comment. Thank you, I think, Thomas, for that.
anyway, anyone who actually has been off boarded for various reasons, I know that's a serious situation, and that's we're not trying
Yeah,
to make light of that. And if you ever want to talk about that, feel free to contact us individually for any kind of back and forth on what's next for you, because it is a serious thing. It's not That's not actually a funny thing. Uh, oh yeah, okay, Greg. Okay, hi. Yeah, so Greg is hanging out in some kind of privacy situation, but that's fine. All right. So I'm back to Return to Office, one of my favorite stump speeches. I'm going to keep this short. This is my top story, but I think there's a really interesting aspect to this because I've been kind of talking about the face off between different approaches to Return to Office, and what I got from a couple of videos that came out on YouTube, which feature let me just pull it up here. Brian Elliott from MIT. Do a search of Brian Elliott on YouTube, and what you'll find is they've compiled a bunch of stats that really show a pretty decisive victory for flexible work. I'll keep it short, but 68% of companies are maintaining flexibility and outperforming their peers in the process. Uh, and so these return to office mandates are getting a lot of press, and some big companies have done it. But the fact remains that most of the CEOs who have not imposed a return to office yet, only 12% who have a flexible work policy plan to implement return to office this year. So I think it's kind of interesting that some of the data points that we always suspected are coming in, which is that flexible approaches to work are going to be a winner from talent and fulfillment and even from productivity standpoints. Brian, I know that's right in your wheelhouse. Do you care to comment quickly on that?
I highly recommend the YouTube video thing and the companion article that it's based off of. And the reason being, there's a lot of study data that backs this up. But more importantly, I like the distinction that it's not really an either or. It's either remote work or it's fully in the office. The article is really talking about probably the best approach is some degree of flexible work arrangements to get the best kind of relationship going with the employees and hang on to them. So anyway, that actually, the one on the left there, the YouTube deal, I would definitely recommend people take a look at that.
Right, and just real quick, the Dropbox one is interesting too because Dropbox is taking a more extreme position, which I personally enjoyed reading. Slamming return to office mandates as being compared to legacy shopping malls. But Dropbox take a more extreme example. So when I'm talking about flexible work winning, Brian's correct. What we're really talking about is hybrid. When we say flexible, we're talking primarily about basically a 3-day a week type of arrangement, which does have certain limitations because for employees that were geographically dispersed or who want to be geographically dispersed, 3 days a week at the office, especially if it's a central office mandate, can still be a problem. Dropbox is talking about something different, which is the data's not in on the 100% remote model to the same extent, though some companies like Dropbox are having success with that. Even Dropbox, though, is incorporating some face-to-face aspects, but without any sort of home office requirement. So I think it's interesting to kind of keep an eye on that because I think ultimately it's also interesting to think about full remote, but then also creating some kind of way to get people together in relevant groups. So it's a fun discussion, and it's good to see some of the data points coming in. Thomas says, could RTO mandates be a strategy to make people go instead of laying them off? Genuine question. Well, Thomas, funny you mentioned that. If you watch the video series, you will see that topic is addressed fully in these 2 videos that are, one of them is recent, one of them 6 months ago. I recommend them both. But yes, getting back to our buzzword discussion, return to office can function many times, I suspect, as sort of a quiet firing, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
the best way to put it. There's, of course, a really, really serious problem with that because it's, from a talent retention standpoint, it's a really, really terrible way to lose your best talent. And that's covered in the video, how most of the top talent, is finding their own ways out of companies like that. And that's not really what you want. Not that any kind of headcount reductions are necessarily a good idea, but losing your best performers via return to office mandate seems like a really stupid idea to me.
John, I'm going to steal the Dropbox headline here and use that analogy when the next time some vendor goes, well, what do you think of our new technology release? Isn't it the most amazing, cutting edge deal? I'm going, no, it feels about like an outdated shopping mall or going to an old school movie theater. It's old tech. And I'm just giving you a heads up, unless you beat me to it at some vendor event.
No,
So
go. You take it and run with it. All right, let's press on.
Yep.
Top stories. So I'm not actually going to spend a lot of time on this Apple reasoning model story, but it's like most AI stories. I think first of all, it was an important study, and it's been corroborated by another study from Salesforce, and this is not the first study around reasoning models either. Gary Marcus on the left talked about a knockout blow for LLMs, and Gary's a pretty staunch critic of LLMs, though not AI in general. He's actually a believer in AI. He just doesn't think LLMs are the way to get there. But the reason I wanted to mention this briefly is that I think it's really, really important for practitioners and decision makers who are planning these products to understand the pros and cons of this technology. And in fact, the debates around these papers cannot always be helpful to that. And so the goal for this stuff in my mind is not just to understand the critique, but to figure out what it means. And one of the nuggets that came out of this is not that these models don't necessarily do any kind of thing that resembles reasoning, because some of the reasoning models are actually useful, but the lesson was that it really depended on the type of issue. So for example, for more simple reasoning tasks, these models didn't work very well, but for kind of mid-level complexity tasks, they actually worked pretty well. And then for the most complex tasks, they really did not do well. And so once again, it kind of shows you part of this is just sensible evaluation of which tools are going to work well for which thing. And to me, that's, if I were taking one thing from this, it wouldn't be like, oh, these models can reason, or, oh, no, they can't. I think that's a distracting debate for enterprises. It's more about getting a sharper sense of which tools are going to help you and which are not, because I view this as a tools discussion, not a religion. And be careful because there's religion and there's people pushing back against the religion, and that doesn't advance your projects. Brian.
We just belong to the religion of the all-powerful algorithm, so this is irrelevant to me. Keep going.
Well, Brent has something relevant. He says it's the Brohammer
Oh,
and the Cowboy, brought to you by the makers of Dr. Pepper. Brent, I will just say that this show does not have an official sponsor, but Brian does have his liquid nutrients on hand. So good
thank
job,
you for
Brian.
that. And to Brent, I was telling John earlier. Today, I was watching on the monitor in my office Talladega Nights, and I was just wondering if they had to make a movie and a repeat, and John and I were the two stars, were Cal and Ricky Bobby, which one of us would play either role? And we'll let you decide that, listeners, who gets to play Cal and who's
We might have to
Ricky Bobby.
submit that to a open poll, but
Yeah, that's
for now we move on
yes.
to my final top story, which has to do with AI leadership in my weekly Enterprise Hits and Misses column. I covered this from a couple of different angles, including a really interesting article by Kath Everett on emotional intelligence and AI. Thomas, you riffed on this on LinkedIn. I think it's an important topic, and Thomas's point on LinkedIn was that AI, as AI takes on more of the admin of managers, then we're going to need more true leaders in the enterprise and less quote unquote managers. I tend to agree with that take, and at the same time, I kind of belly aching a little bit that I think we needed this a long time ago. I don't know why we had to wait for quote unquote AI in order to see an imperative there, because I think we've needed more leaders and less bureaucratic managers for kind of a long time in the enterprise. But one thing I did want to mention a little bit is sort of this notion that I've been developing around the I've been watching a lot of AI leadership videos on YouTube. You can send your condolences care of whatever social media platform you prefer. Uh, but one of my big wow, that's so loud. We've got some kind of a rumble outside. One of my big things around this topic is what I've been calling the paradox of AI leadership, which is that I think leaders do need to have a few different things at the same time that are kind of potentially seem like a contrast. So, for example, I think leaders do need to be able to have bottom line results with AI, but they also need to cultivate a culture of experimentation. So those things have some tension. But I think they also need deeper technical know-how. And on the video from MIT Sloan that had 10 essential leadership traits, they actually talked about playfulness, Brian. So don't cringe too much here. They also talked about courage, and that they were surprised that there wasn't more talk about data literacy and tech skills. So I pushed back on that and I said, playfulness and courage are important, but if you don't have the technical and data literacy chops, you're going to make huge mistakes. There was a quote here about how even more important than the tech is imagining how this will change work. Well, without deep knowledge of the tech, you can't accurately rethink how it will impact work. You'll reimagine incorrectly beyond what the tech can do. And so don't downplay those skills. And I bring that quote out now because I think it's going to come up again in our halftime show. But anyway, I think it's interesting to think about leaders needing to become more technical and more business engaged at the same time. And I would argue that both are true. So just one more point on that. I got into an argument with an HR leader at a show this spring who said, I don't need to worry about AI tech because it's like my iPhone. As long as it works, it works. And I told him, like, it's totally different. Like an iPhone, you don't need to know how to fix an iPhone and what's inside and how it's doing what it's doing. But if you drop this into your HR practice and it starts screening and hiring and recruiting and onboarding employees and helping you with your performance reviews, you sure as hell better know why it's making those decisions and how it is. And he conceded the point, and I'm going to stand firm on it.
So, in this case, both of these pieces are something I recommend the viewers check out. The Diginomic article is probably the quicker, faster read, but it's got a bunch of stuff that's not in the YouTube video. And that YouTube video, interestingly enough, is one of these MIT Sloan videos from one of their shows. It's definitely worth catching. And finally, on that point, Jon used to bust on me all the time because I would pull up all these articles from MIT, from Strategy and Business, the PwC magazine, or Harvard Business Review, or whatever. And here's Jon using this stuff now.
Well,
So
I don't
either
remember busting on you, but hey, man, turnabout is fair game, and I'm sure it happened, so I'm not going to question it. We have LinkedIn users, Greg saying a Zombie is who goes to the office, only to be in Zoom with others who are not in the same office. Yes, which is one more reason why rethinking office mandates is a good idea. Teams are distributed and they're forced to go to the office, says Thomas, and conduct their Zoom meetings from there. Right, so that doesn't make any sense. Whereas I think what a firm like Dropbox is trying to do is to think about what's our most productive time as a group together, and let's do that. And I think when you really step back, you're going to find that team building, brainstorming, business planning, crisis management, those are the kinds of things that really pay off in person, not sitting next to each other, conducting Teams meetings and trying to figure out why certain colleagues have turned off their cameras and don't want to listen to what you're saying. Anyway, Brian, do you want to go on to your story? Shall we press on?
Yeah, mine are going to go real quick, which is fine because we need the time anyway for the halftime show.
Yeah, and we're going to need you to review you're going to be the main reviewer of our halftime content, so we're going to need that.
Okay, so the first thing I wanted to bring up, there's more and more color coming out about these fake job seekers who actually can write code or do other kind of engineering roles, but they're coming out of the nation state of North Korea, and their sole purpose is to funnel in wages back into the North Korea because they can't get any hard currency. And also because they're trying to get these people to plant spyware or download trade secrets, intellectual property, and everything else. But I thought the most fascinating thing was not all the AI and everything else these North Koreans are using to get sensitive jobs here in the US and Western Europe, but it's how you detect them. And the first thing is you make some insult to dear leader Kim Jong-un. And if you do that, these people, they know their every movement, every communication is being monitored, and because they're communicating with the West, that will end the recruiter's video interview just like that. Anyway.
Oh my God. That's classic.
It's a great read. It really is. And it's a staggeringly wicked read when you realize how much of this kind of stuff's going on. And the other reason I bring up a story like this is there's so much rah-rah about AI right now of all flavors, and no one is talking about some of the misuse of what's going on. And I know that makes me sound like I'm Debbie Downer here on it. I think there's a role and a good place and a way to use AI intelligently, but my God, do we need better protections and think about all the misuse that could occur out there. Let's go to the next one. This was an interesting piece. Salary.com was referencing a study by another company, and they were talking about how great a percentage of time that employees, actual working people, are using an AI tool at work, even though their employer may not know that. And they're potentially sharing trade secrets, other intellectual property, whatever, while they're feeding it into some AI engine to like summarize a document or to create a presentation for them or what have you. And companies are absolutely clueless that this stuff is going on, and they haven't put enough, if you will, guardrails, to overuse a word in the AI space, to prevent this kind of activity going. And so this to me is like wake up call number 2, that AI's usage may not be something you're fully aware of. So where we used to have shadow IT, now we got shadow AI, and the threat to a company's existence could be quite real.
Yeah, Brian, and you know what's interesting too is the pretty high percentages of folks that are using it or using it in inappropriate ways. A lot of the free plans they might be using incorporate all that queries into future training as sort of as a default. So there's your IP out the door, and in the paid plans, you still have to go into the settings and disable a lot of those features. So good times for companies because clever prompts by your competitors may yield trade secrets in future releases. Sounds fun?
I'm getting
Maybe your lawyers will be working this weekend after all.
Well, I know this weekend I'll be spending most of the weekend resetting or changing all my passwords. I want to thank whatever numbnuts collected all that stuff and then made it hackable, across all those companies. Anyway, I can't wait for that class action suit. I want to get my piece of the coin on that. My last one here. What a doofus deal. Two major newspapers
Oh yeah.
actually published list of like the top 10 books you ought to read this summer, and it turned out that every one of them is non-existent. It was all an AI generated titles, and but it didn't just fool these papers. They had no protections, no editing, no nothing, to catch this stuff. What an embarrassment here. So just when you think we haven't had a good hallucination story in a while, then we find this thing and realize it's snookered a whole bunch of people. Anyway,
Brian, one of the worst things about this is, as far as I understand, that I think some of this was distributed in a print version as well.
oh yeah, yeah.
So no going online and fixing it. Just send out bullshit to your audience.
Although the one thing I'll admit, I cheated and looked at the list of these fake books because I was pretty sure one analyst who had written a book that his had to bet on that list. I really thought it
Oh
was
my
an AI
God.
inspired piece of
Wow.
fiction, but it wasn't on there anyway.
Wow.
Let's keep going.
Shots fired for those of you that are paying deep attention to the enterprise subdrama on this show.
The last thing I just want to point out, talk about this should be called "The Dog Ate My Homework" story. Some guy drove his Tesla onto railroad tracks, got 40 to 50 feet down the tracks, and got it really good and screwed up. Uh, well, tell Brent, you spell it the way you feel it. And I think
Is the spelling doofus or doofus with the U's or the O's? Wow.
I think that's a great ask generative AI question right there.
Either way, I think the biggest thing is you have to say it with feeling,
Yeah.
and I feel like Brian definitely does that.
So the last word on that Tesla, you don't need to bring it up. Just the whole point of that was we're still talking about AI as if it's the cure-all for everything, and yet it's probabilistic. And if what this guy alleged that his full-time, automated driving technology was engaged and it made the error, if that were true, and others have quite a bit of doubts about that, but if the guy had done it that way, it tells you that AI is not perfect. It needs real human oversight. And that's the message I think needs to keep coming out in these AI conversations. Anyway, that's maybe a good segue to go to our halftime show.
We will. Thomas says the quote at the end is, and he's referring to the insert story, by the way, about the fake books, is giving exactly the problem arising in biz environments. People are so busy that they do not always check anymore, as things often mostly work out. Yeah, Thomas, I mean, it depends a little bit on often, depends on your architecture, but you can expect somewhere between 65 to 95% accuracy if you're lucky. But yeah, sometimes on the higher end of that's one of my biggest fears, is that people will start trusting output so much that they just hit it and hit approve and hit approve and hit approve. And You'll notice that lawyers keep getting dragged into the news for doing that and filing case briefings that don't exist and getting
Mhm.
scolded by judges pretty much across the world. So yeah, there's this question of like, if these systems were totally unreliable, that wouldn't be a problem. But how much do you trust? Well, that sets up the halftime show pretty nicely. So shall we go to that?
Sure.
So, Thomas has some quips on Texans. Okay, yes, indeed. Yep, and this is a halftime show that could end up really dominating the rest of the show, but in a good way. Brian proposed that we do a contrast between Mary Meeker of Bond's infamous 340 slides on AI versus Accenture's AI, a Declaration of Autonomy Technology Vision report. And I'm going to give you a full disclosure. I really hate both of these. So I hate the Accenture one a lot more. But I do admit that they provoke a good discussion. Brian is going to be the lead in terms of telling you actually what's in these. But I'm going to have some color commentary for you on why I think these reports are fraught with problems. But anyway, Brian, I'm going to turn it over to you here. And you can decide how much of this you want to cover. That's a pretty dense slide, but go for it.
So, by the way, full disclosure, yes, I did work at Accenture a couple of decades ago, and if you think I'm being too rah-rah or too down on it, well, I've been gone so long it doesn't really matter anymore. But I just wanted to cop to that right off the bat. And I knew of Mary when she was with Morgan Stanley back in the internet and the beginning of all the cloud stuff days when she worked with Chuck Phillips. Anyway, she's published a bunch of these kind of compendiums in prior years, but it's been a good 5 years or more since she did this particular piece. Now, let's talk about the Accenture one. They've been doing this for like 25 years. They produce this technology trends report. This thing called the Declaration of Autonomy, when you strip down all that buzzwordy stuff, what it really comes out is they think that AI enables people to kind of think about deconstructing applications to smaller bits. I don't want to say it's like objects, but it allows us to have a lot more flexibility and do different kinds of things so that we don't have to follow the old, well-worn, one-size-fits-all way of doing a process and what have you. That's one angle of this. But they're talking about all this new kinds of autonomy that comes out, and that's one of their points they're going to hit. They also think they also had a lot of discussion on topics like trust and the like, and I'll get into that in a moment. And they had a few pages at the back end around robots. Robots, I think, are showing up in a lot of these kind of studies as something that will eventually be a beneficiary of more of this maybe generalized intelligence as it comes available. But right now, I don't think the real actions on the robot scene at the moment. They also think that AI could help with brands, and I think this is a big but, there are so many opportunities, as we've already seen, for companies to suffer immense brand damage when they don't have the person in the middle and they don't pay attention to this stuff. And by the way, I don't know if that was Brent or Thomas was making a comment. We were talking about the person in the middle issue a second ago, but I asked last fall 2 or 3 software CEOs, show me any work plan you've got that shows a workflow that's got a person in the middle, and show me in the business case where the cost is for the person in the middle to be reviewing all this stuff. And all I heard then were crickets chirping, and you can better believe it, I'm going to be asking that question from those same executives this fall when I see them again. Okay, Brent, Cowboy must have slide in. Okay, well, yes, thank you for that. I got a feeling John sent an IM to Brent, so Brent would put that message up there.
No, back channel, Brian. I've got a fully eye on the prize here. I'm here with you, man.
So We'll get in. I just want to give you, this is a 67-page report that Accenture did. It's relatively well researched. They've got all their citations in the back of this thing. There are some interesting graphics in there, but this report's really about painting a narrative around four key themes and anchoring them all with the autonomy deal. And in a break from what they've done in prior years, they only focused on one technology, in this case, AI. And in the past, they would focus on half a dozen or whatever different kind of things. So that's the key setup on it. What's the next slide?
More on Accenture. I've got some salty things to say about Accenture, but I'll wait until you finish your review.
So all I was going to say here is they really like to draw this analogy. I heard them talk about this on the video version as well as in the written report about how this whole AI stuff is kind of like child rearing, and I really cringed at that metaphor. The thing is, when you're building applications, and maybe it's my bias because I'm so used to working with back office things, whether it's HR and all the compliance and payroll exactitudes that are required, or in finance where the books have to be perfect or you go to jail. This idea of, the analogy they're drawing, I think really falls apart when you're trying to work with those kinds of workflows and agentic processes, where there's going to be errors, hallucinations, you got to have all this guardrail stuff. I don't believe we're ready for that yet. I think that world is still a ways off. Jon.
All right. So I'm not going to take too much time on Accenture yet because some of my critique of these reports is kind of both of them at once.
Yeah.
But I do want to say that these folks are never accountable for their past missteps. So we have to take with a grain of salt that in 2022, which was not that long ago, Accenture's technology vision report was centered around shameless hand waving for the WebMe metaverse era. So I'm just saying that these prognosticators are not as visionary as they might imply at times. And this whole autonomy thing is pretty deeply problematic. Right now, these agents can't reliably order a pizza for you. So autonomy is problematic. But the reason that people like talking about it is because it's exciting. And like you said, you implied, I think, there's a lot of shareholders love this shit because humans are a line item on the cost sheet, and the less we can have to do with them, the better. And human supervision messes with the ROI. So yeah, bring on the autonomy. However, the data piles up that multi-agent systems are replete with problems in terms of the handoffs. So you try to simplify these workflows so the agents can handle them, but each agent can only be 95% or whatever accurate, and the compound error resulting in that is not covered in either of these documents, of course. We're just made to believe that everything's going to work. And I would point out that the cringy child parent anecdote is really brutal. Because so Accenture basically was like, well, they talked about trust, like that you have guardrails. By the way, guardrails are so breakable with AI, it's ridiculous. But this whole idea that, yeah, you put guardrails on your kids, and as they earn your trust, they're more and more autonomous. Well, some kids have special needs and can never be left alone. And I would say that that's what AI systems are, is systems that have jagged intelligence with special needs that need supervision. And so the analogy, which is so cheesy, totally breaks down because you don't trust everything to operate on its own. You trust the things that have earned that trust. And in fact, a little bit of healthy distrust of these systems is actually quite healthy. I would point out that the word hallucinations is used only once in the Accenture report and never in Mary Meeker's slides. I think these reports collectively lack any connection to the realities that today's decision makers are dealing with. Now, I understand that they are future bent, but they seem to take the assumption that everything's going to get better in like 3 or 6 months. Well, I have news for you. A lot of the core problems with deep learning were actually specified decades ago. They've been trying to solve these problems for 20 years, not 3 months. So, anyway, that's not to say that these reports aren't useful to discuss. I'm just struggling with the architecture, Brian. That's all. I'm just struggling with it. And I will say this. I'm going to put the challenge on you and me to defy what these reports did and break down our takeaways in a handful of sentences so that the viewers of this video don't have to go through 340 slides unless they really want to. I think it's good to go through the slides. I would recommend it. And I'd recommend looking at the Accenture report as well to understand their position. But I would recommend going deeper. So that's my view on that.
Yeah, so you're looking at a total of 407 slides if you want to get through it all. Anyway, but just so those of you on the call know this, Jon and I have both read these reports, but we haven't had a chance to talk about our feelings in advance.
Which is the whole point. That's what makes live television so exciting. We don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, so Jon's clearly, he's going to carry the curmudgeon flag, I can tell on this one.
Yes.
And I'm always the super cautious one anyway on the AI side, but it'll be interesting. We've still got a couple more slides here on this, and then we're going to have a bit more free form on what we think about this stuff overall. So,
and no AI agent can replace our hosts, including the hallucinations. And I'm here to announce that we will never have AI avatars running this show or approximating this show, as we're seeing a lot of these days. So you can rest assured, is whenever you come here, you're going to see us in all of our imperfect human glory and imperfection. Okay, going on with the halftime show there.
All right, before I say dive into Bond, I just want to point out, it dawned on me you're not wearing your Woody Guthrie or whatever hat anymore.
This is a Guthrie one too, but it's just doesn't have the name. But yes, actually, that hat had a problem and it had to go through a special cleaning process, and it's back, so it will be worn next time. It is back.
If you need some, I got probably a dozen of these gimme caps back here. But
Brian, okay. wait till I tell you the whole story. It's not suitable for live. Anyway, commenters, please keep your thoughts coming as we go here, because we'll get to them. But Brian, give us the rundown.
All right, so let's talk about the Bond report. This thing is like all slides, and I want to point that out. Whereas the Accenture deal, you've got some graphics, but it's a lot of nice prose and so forth. They're two different formats, but it's long. And what it is this is more about data points as opposed to telling a story. The story is for the reader to figure out on their, or to infer, because when you look at this just overwhelming amount of information on all these different themes, and they're well organized, and you got to give her credit, Mary and her team, they triangulate things 5 ways but Sunday to make sure they've got the trend documented, everything else, and all the different angles on it looked at. They may have missed some areas. We'll probably talk about that in the debrief in a second. But when you read this thing, you are going to believe at the end of it that there is a bucket load of money going towards AI. You will believe that we need to pay more attention and have more discussion about countries like China and what they're doing, and a few more kind of points we'll get into. But this thing is, this report is a great resource in figuring out where the money's going. It's kind of like if you were trying to figure out where would I invest going forward. Do I invest in an enterprise application software vendor, or do I hitch my star on the AI side? You kind of reading the stats would get very enthusiastic and probably thinking I need to go, almost totally on the AI side hard. But we can talk about whether that's really the right way to go or not. So that's the first part. That's just giving you a setup on the report itself. Jon.
Yeah, I think we have some more let's continue maybe with your summary. You've got some more good summaries.
Yeah.
Thomas is asking if we hallucinate once in a while. Well, Thomas, of course. I mean, what do you
But
expect?
not, Thomas, if you're drinking the quality beverage of Dr. Pepper. Remember, Dr. Pepper, the 1024 beverage of tech analysts everywhere.
One difference,
Just
Thomas, is
kidding.
that we're able to reflect on our mistakes after the fact. Got you there.
Mm.
Anyway, on we go with Brian's summary of the 340 slide deck.
So, no summary. I mean, I could. I've seen two different AI generated summaries of the bond report, and they just go on and on and on and on and on. And there's that much information that included in them. But one thing, a couple of things really got my attention. On the bond report, only Salesforce Agent Force got any kind of mention. If you go read these thinking you're going to find an amazing amount of information about what's happening in the general application software space and all the usual suspects in the ERP market, except for an occasional mention of Oracle here and there, it's not they're not a factor in this conversation or in this report. You just don't see much about it. The other thing that you find out is, and I think this was actually in the Accenture study, they did a breakdown in the back of the deal where they showed how big the companies were that responded to their survey. And like the smallest company had revenues north of 5 billion. And that tells me that a lot of what's moving here is a train or trend or whatever that's touching very large firms for now, but really isn't having any kind of import to smaller firms, mid-size and down at this time. And that, I think, is worthy of additional conversation. One of these other things I thought was interesting, the capital requirements. I mean, there were estimates in there of $10 billion to train a large public LLM for this year. And so how can somebody who's got, an application software vendor who's maybe got revenues in the $100-200 million range, how in the world do they create their own kind of LLMs of any value when they're going up against some of these giant generalized LLMs that have that kind of a training price tag with them? There's a lot to consider in this report. And I can't just summarize the whole thing in 4 bullet points, but those are just some of the points there. John?
So, all right. So let's save the total breakdown for a sec. Look, I mean, I think I feel like both of these reports have a little bit of the religion. Thomas is saying, what do you make of the fact that only Salesforce is mentioned? The thing I take away from that, Thomas, is the focus is really to provide like an overall scope of where everything's headed. It's not an enterprise market analysis. It's just not. And so part of why we chose to put the report on is to start seeing if we can boil down some of the lessons from these into things that customers can actually put to use. The thing that I like the most about this 340 slides is I think there was a real attempt to quantify the scope of what is happening with AI on a global basis. And I think there's there's a pretty effective case made here that this is a real like bona fide like thing that is happening, right? Like, and no one really disagrees with that, I think, at this point, but the documentation that's provided there is pretty overwhelming. I would take issue a little bit with the idea that there isn't some level of subjectivity. I think there is some AI religion in this report that needs to get pulled out a little bit. But one thing that I will say about it is that the unprecedented scope of this technology doesn't mean necessarily that it's making our lives better. I think there's a good conversation to be had that a lot of things happening with AI are actually exacerbating, not necessarily causing, but exacerbating some pretty serious cultural problems, some pretty serious privacy problems when you look at surveillance. These reports are incredibly light on those topics. There's obviously big defects in the technology when it comes to accuracy and also making sense of adapting to situations beyond the training set. There's very little discussion of pattern matching and prediction based on patterns, which is actually what these systems are doing. It's all about cognitive systems, and I think we can really debate whether these are truly cognitive systems. And I would argue that that's a good thing, because if we had truly cognitive systems, most of us wouldn't have jobs right now, and we need time for that. So the fact that this technology is a little bit flawed, I think, is important to mention, and it really doesn't come out in this report. You would think that these models never made mistakes, and you would think that these therapy bots have never told people that they should go kill themselves. So anyway, one of the things that I want to pick out a little bit is Meeker's report says sports is a good analogy for AI's constant improvements. First of all, AI is improving constantly, but it makes leaps and then slower improvements. OpenAI, in fact, has had to hold off on their 5.0 model because they can't make the improvements that they're trying to make enough to put out the 5.0 release. But anyway, they say, as athletes continue to wow us and break records, their talent is increasingly enhanced by better data inputs training. Well, I looked this up, and the current men's world record for running a mile, 3 minutes and 43 seconds, hasn't been broken. It's been on the books since 1999. And I would also make a solid case that AI and analytics are pretty much ruining sports. My team, the Boston Celtics, pretty much lost this year because they were jacking up too many threes based on adherence to analytics. So I think we have to be a little bit careful about implying that AI and technology is making everything better. I'm still, if y'all have the evidence that life is so much better with AI, that'd be great. I mean, there was a big study that came out that said that productivity really hasn't gone up through the use of these tools. It was a massive study with 25,000 users. We have some pretty big technical bumps in the past that are pretty significant that we kind of downplay now, but things like the invention of airlines, I would argue the invention of the internet itself, the transition from paper-based systems to computers, these don't seem sexy at the moment. But one of my biggest problems with Meeker's report is that it doesn't really acknowledge IP and copyright and the fact that these systems are smart because it was trained on the internet, and yet the internet, the human internet, is threatened by these systems. So where is AI going to get the further training that it needs to become more intelligent? Like, it's actually from all this information that has not been accounted for. There's a bunch of lawsuits that are probably going to have to get settled around it. But the point is that where are they going to get that? I mean, synthetic data is going to help in some areas, but in fact, it's not there. So anyway, I think this is a really interesting issue as far as the human internet built by humans is the reason we have intelligent machines. So maybe we could just be honest about that and not pretend like this is miracle technology. So that'd be my start on the Meeker report.
So, slightly different assessment. This report was written by somebody who spent a lot of their career, almost all their career, in financial sector investments and the like. So if you're an investor, you always want to be on the front edge, the knife point, if you will, of where markets are moving. Okay, and this has huge amounts of data that show you directionally where the money's going, who are the recipients of that money. And there's a lot in there about more than you'd ever want to know about NVIDIA and other companies like that. Or, there's a lot in there, knowledge about the server technology and all this kind of stuff, and the data centers that are being built out and where they're going. So if I'm a Wall Streeter, I love this kind of a report. If I'm a if I'm a venture capitalist, I love this kind of report. But you're right, John. What's missing is that human element issue, and there are some very practical and pragmatic pitfalls. There's no discussion about citizen AI and how it's going to bork up some stuff. And when I was listening to you talk just a second ago, what crossed my mind, how many times I've been at companies where they made decisions that we're now outsource, like all of our accounting to India, just as an example. And yet they expect the current workforce that they're going to fire any day now to take the time to train the replacements for that. And you know what happens most of the time? The best and brightest, they're out the door the minute they get wind of this kind of outsourcing move going to happen. And there is no one left of any quality that can actually do the training. And because they know they're like slitting their own throat when they do that career wise. Who's going to do this training, for some of this stuff? I don't know. But I would say neither of them actually touch on the problems like how do we fundamentally reimagine how work is going to get done? That question's never really answered by either one of these studies, and I think it's a critical one to look at because. And I also don't think that the approaches that particularly on the Accenture study about where what the future work looks like, I didn't think they went anywhere near the level of depth they should have to figure out where that's going to go. And I think I actually have a bullet point in that coming up. But
Yeah,
anyway,
I want to get to that. And one thing I wanted to point out is that I didn't. I think you're absolutely right about the investor angle on this, and I recommend everyone look at this to kind of understand how investors view this market, and they make some important points around how the Anthropics and OpenAIs are a little bit like Uber and Lyft type companies, in that they haven't really generated a profitable business model yet, but the whole point is to capture market share and then build that. And we'll see. But I do have investor related critiques of this as well, and I'm not going to get into all of them today because we're running out of time. But one thing that the report says is that inference costs are collapsing and becoming a commodity. I don't see it at all. I've done a lot of research on this. The new reasoning models are actually more expensive at the point of inference. And all of the attempts to make these models more accurate are going to happen around what is referred to as test time scaling, which is actually investing a lot of tooling and verification technologies and sub-agents and all of this stuff at the point of inference. So I don't believe that inference costs are really going down. And so if you're an investor reading this and you take it as gospel that inference costs are becoming a commodity, I would say to that investor, that's not right. That's not supported by the current data that's out there. And so I would challenge people to just don't take this report as gospel, but take it as a really important source, because look, these people know way more about investing in AI than I ever will. So I'm just a scrappy journalist analyst making a living on the fringes of this shit. So, but I would like to think that my outlier perspective and folks like yourself as well provides a little bit of a corrective to get people to say, yeah, I'm going to look at this, but it's not the only way to go. Brian, I want to get back to your slides. So let's get back here. You want to contrast the two. Give us the rundown here.
There's no comparison when you get to the bond report now. All the different sources of data and everything else they have. That's not a knock on the Accenture report. The Accenture report's quite a bit smaller, and so let's be fair. But that the bond report is just like we said, overwhelming amount of information there. Nobody really focused on the traditional application software space. There was some discussion about how we're going to see AI possibly generate some industry-specific kinds of workflows and/or apps or pieces of apps and so forth that are going to be monetized. That's kind of already happening. But as far as what are we supposed to take away from this based on what happens to Workday and SAP and other kind of companies? No discussion on that really at all in there. Agent Force was the only thing that got any conversation at all, and it's just a very small piece of what got covered in these reports. The China deal I mentioned before, I do think that's something that needs more conversation. And this thing about trust and branding, at least it got covered in the Accenture report. It never came up, to my knowledge, I don't think in the bond report or Mary's report. And the impact of AI on all these other constituents, that never really comes up that much either, if at all. What is the impact? What is the impact AI is going to have? Just even on the workforce, kind of just gets glossed over or ignored. And and this, what do we do about all the companies with less than 5 billion in revenue? I think that's a very important question.
So intellectual property is a big deal, and there's a lot of pending lawsuits around that. I was quite surprised to see neither report having the guts to touch on that at all.
Correct.
And I did a search on intellectual property and copyright, and the only one I found was Accenture copywriting their own report. Have fun with that, Accenture. That's going to get scooped up into the training data, just like everything else that you did and criticize in your report for doing the same thing. And so one of the reasons why I think that matters, Brian, is that while I think a lot of these lawsuits are probably not, unfortunately, going to go where I would like them to go, which is to the copyright holders and all of that, it does potentially have material impact on the investment economy. So I'm rather astonished that the bond report didn't even choose to touch on it. But having said that, like I'm just trying to provide a little bit of a contrast because there was so much enthusiasm around this. I just wanted to kind of plant a few seeds that there's a lot more to talk about that isn't here. But what I thought would be fair is that since both reports do have summaries, but which are good, like to skim, but they don't really have takeaways for the kind of customers that we're talking about today. So I thought that what we should do before we wrap up is to kind of give our audience and our podcast listeners what we think are the takeaways from these items. So I want to kind of shift from kind of my grouchy poking holes or whatever and Brian's summaries into like, what should customers do with this? Because like you said, the implications are pretty profound. So do you want to go or do you want me to go? How do you want to? Oh, wait, we got Thomas here. Do the reports talk about the impact of young people at the start of their careers? No. Nope. And actually, Thomas, I would probably put off the bulk of that question because I think it's actually pretty profound. And in fact, I think it kind of dovetails into another topic, which is the disruption of the educational system in general, both high school and college. And that's probably worthy, honestly, of a full show, either on this show or on your show or whatever. I think we would do short shrift trying to really touch on that. I will say that I think some of the hype around the job market for college students is a little overblown in terms of like blaming that all on AI, but I do think there is a certain phenomenon of needing less junior employees for certain tasks that isn't helpful in the current economy. And one of the really big questions in my mind is how do young people make productive use of this technology? Because I'm increasingly believing that it's only the experts that can really scale these tools productively because they're the ones that can really spot the flaws in the output. Whereas young people learning trades, I think it's a little bit harder to spot, even though I do think this is going to be valuable for educational purposes. But when it comes to like for example, if you ask a young person to file a legal brief around this, that's going to get a little tricky to do that research. So anyway, it's going to be really interesting to figure out how do you bring young people along? But that's probably for another time, unless Brian, you want to comment on it briefly.
Yeah, we're running out of time, but I would agree that's something we talk about going forward.
So do you want to do customer takeaways, or do you want me to give mine? How do you want to do it?
I'll give one or so just to kick it off. I think we need to listeners ought to really create like some kind of a power team or whatever teams in their company. Or if you have one team that's looking at AI, you need to have different people with different personas represented in that team. You need someone who's going to be the pro AI person who's looking for every possible way we could use it. You need someone else who's going to be the voice of caution and concern. And then a third who's going to be looking at how will competitors and ne'er-do-wells, whatever, want to use this stuff also. And in those conversations, when this team meets every few days to kind of go over what else they've learned as they expand their knowledge base, because you're not going to crack this in an afternoon. This is going to be a big effort that's going to run for years and years. You're going to want to have all these different perspectives represented in it. Well, and that's how you learn and you make better decisions is when you have a more holistic kind of view of the landscape that's out there. That's my first one.
A little plumbing job. Well, that's what we're getting into now, Greg. One thing I did want to add, Brian, because I think it's material to our recommendations, is that these reports really didn't touch on cost very much. And this is actually an expensive technology. And even though there's some encouraging like developments this year, including DeepSeek and how it was able to distill a lot of models, and and there's some data center scale backs that are happening, but it's still in the context of data center expansion, which tells you that this is expensive technology that has environmental impact and consequences on environmental issues, but also that the cost is part of what we have to think about. I think the bond team is treating it like it's going to become a commodity like running water. I don't think that's an accurate way of looking at it, because there's other technologies, including other forms of machine learning, for example, that are up to 20 or 30 times cheaper than generative AI currently. And I don't think there's evidence that that's going to change dramatically in the coming years. Maybe eventually it will become more of a commodity. I don't see it. So I think that factors into my recommendations for customers. So I'll share a few of mine. I have 5. So the first 3 are, just because AI is having a massive material impact doesn't mean it's going to make your project better or that you're going to be successful. So I think the thing I take from this is take this information, but figure out how you're going to work it into your project. AI is a tool, not a religion, and in some cases a pretty expensive tool. So it always makes sense to evaluate other machine learning and automation approaches as well, and pick the one that's the best fit and take costs into account. Another big one, and this, Brian, applies specifically towards a lot of the smaller companies you're referring to, is that consuming AI through your vendor of choice is often better than going it alone right now. The architectures are really complex and moving targets. Like, one of the things in the Meeker report, there's an assertion that AI is becoming more accurate and real, than humans, which is honestly, it's complete bullshit that that's the case. They cite one benchmark study. It's just not true in a broader context. Yes, in certain domains it is, but it's not across the board. And so in the context of your own project, picking the right use cases and going with vendors who get better accurate results for you and better results with your data, that's a complex architecture that involves components like RAG, MCP, agent-to-agent protocols, tool-to-tool protocols. All this stuff, you can't do that if you're a small business. So I would say for now, look to vendors that you trust to do your projects, but then also look into your own culture and start thinking about how you're going to also sandbox, play around with these tools, to use the word playfulness again, which is a wonderful theme of our show, and start cultivating the curiosity. So instead of forcing people to use these tools as some kind of AI first mandate, encourage them to explore them and create their own business cases and propose them through much of a reward and recognition system, and not through an imposition of, you better do this before you even ask us if we'll hire someone else for your team.
So the extension of that is, when I mentioned the deal about China, I think clients or customers definitely have to take a look at what new geopolitical kind of risk are we about to bite off. We know that different nations are all trying to arm up their AI capabilities, and they're going to have either protectionistic walls, or they're going to want access to your IP or whatever. There's a whole bunch of new risk and planning concerns that you got to look into. Where are you going to get the servers? Where's your data moving? All the data sovereignty stuff really needs a hard relook in the AI age. Anyway, I know we're short of time, so keep going. What's another one?
Yeah, and folks, if you're in the chat, do start popping in your final questions. My final 2 are, there isn't one kind of AI. There's a fork in the road between the AI that makes your employees better and smarter versus an AI that cultivates a surveillance culture around you and creates headcount reduction and fear amongst your staff. So pick that road very carefully, and that there is room to reimagine and rethink work with this new technology, and find a way to do that, but also to get momentum through successful projects. And I do want to point out that while I have played like the eviscerating critic today on Diginomica throughout the spring, I've been, I'm not the only one. A bunch of us have done this, and Brian has done it too, cultivating and documenting the use cases of companies that are having some success. In fact, I did a successful Agentforce use case around a customer-facing bot in the travel industry, which I thought for sure I was going to call BS on, but it was actually a really good use case. So the point is, there are really good use cases for this technology, and I want to make clear that I believe that. I just think there's room for a much more like precise and thoughtful approach to the conversation that really takes into account what enterprises need. That's all.
I saw you got some fan love on that Agent Force case study on the out there.
Got a little bit of fan love, but it happens.
So one short little point is for years, a lot of companies have had alliances or relationships with like a critical couple of integrators and a critical couple of technology providers, including maybe their favorite hyperscaler, whatever. There's a whole new level of players out there and nations that you've got to worry about. What is your relationship with NVIDIA, or is it going, or Amazon or something, and different parts of Amazon now. It's a whole different group of Meta, another example. A lot of companies have no real material relationship with a lot of the big six in the AI area because it's a mix also of hardware and software and data centers and the like. It's not the same hyperscaler crowd necessarily as what was there before. And I think companies have to revisit who will our alliance partners be that are going to help take us forward in the AI age.
Yeah, that's interesting, right, Brian? And I think one of the key criteria there is going to be a different level of trust and risk management as well, right? So,
Yeah.
I think more than any technology that I've seen in recent years, this is obviously way more for real than any kind of blockchain or metaverse technology, but it does require a different level of trust than almost any technology as well, and that has big implications for the service providers you choose. But I don't think just sticking with your conventional relationships is the way to go either. Sometimes you need to find a sparkling new vendor. Bit disappointed that the Gartners, Forresters, and IDCs of the world haven't produced a good AI report just yet, says Greg. Well, Greg, I'm all for taking pot shots at the big analyst firms, but I'm suspecting you're not a paid subscriber of all three, so I'm wondering if you're in a position to make that call. I do know some smart analysts at those firms who do ask really good questions about AI at shows I go to, but I can't tell you for a fact that they've written reports because they don't share those with me. But I would be shocked if they haven't come up with something halfway decent. So I'm not so sure about that one.
Well,
Brian, you're thinking of what to say. All right, man. I gotta hear. I'm pressing you on this one. You got to say something on this, man.
I would say that the absence of data from some of those companies, particularly in the bond report, was telling. I did not see a lot of data sourced from those kind of places, and they were doing a lot more primary stuff, pulling right out annual reports and other kinds of data, which I thought. I like that. I mean, they were getting very close to where the money comes from. Back to my point, this was the bond report in particular was a very financially focused and directional deal. One of the things about Mary's report is she starts her team. They start off with talking about what's happened in the past, what's happening now, and then they're showing you the growth rate. And every one of those charts just about showed a curvilinear or logarithmic kind of growth rate on just about anything that they reported. Read the reports. That everyone should do that. Regardless of what Jon and I's remarks are, read them, and you need to internalize the stuff and figure out what does this mean for my organization going forward. Anyway.
Indeed. And one thing I will say about this comment, Greg, is that if you're making the argument perhaps that some of this information should be put out more public, I could sympathize with that as well. Because I think one of the reasons why we were able to do a show around these two and not around the three firms you just mentioned is because we have public information to chew on here. And, kudos to those firms for putting their views out there. So
agreed. It takes courage to publish like that. And, I didn't come on here, to praise or bury either one of them. I think both companies put a lot of thought in this stuff, and the obviously, with so many people wanting to talk about Mary's report alone, and they clearly hit a nerve out in the market. Anyway, uh, I do think for us, the bigger question, somebody's trying to tell me it's dinner time. Um, say hi.
Brian's on his own with a solo flight on the dog care this weekend. So here we go.
So anyway, all I was going to say is we need to have a follow-on conversation. What is really going to happen with ERP? Because these reports really don't talk about it. I think we need to talk about the app space.
Well, funny you should mention that, Brian, because Greg says ERP, cloud, maybe blockchain come to mind as trendsetters of the day. Yeah, I think blockchain has turned out to be more of a whiff in the enterprise than a hit, but it did actually, aside from a lot of companies that wasted a lot of money on pilots, it did provoke a lot of good conversations because it has some unique characteristics that get you thinking about decentralized technologies and all of that. And yeah, so I would say kudos to both these firms for provoking these conversations, and I respect the intellectual effort, particularly around the bond report, and I don't want to make it sound like I don't. I struggle a little bit right now with the religious fervor around this technology, and I'm going to admit that because it makes me wonder what my voice is in all of that. So I got to push back a little bit, but that's all. I still encourage you to read it for yourself and to come to your own conclusions.
Great. I think we have two tiny little slides right behind this.
Oh yeah, Brian. We got a little bit of whiff action to wrap it up. And
yeah,
if y'all in the comments have any final comments, now is the time because we are going to wrap shortly. Humorous aside, whiff of the month. Yeah, I mean, I guess on some level this is fairly dark humor, but AI therapy bots conducting illegal behavior. It's funny because part of what Meeker didn't touch on as much, but I think is important, is the cultural phenomenon of AI. Like when you look at real tech change, it starts in culture, just like the mobile phone had a big culture impact first before the enterprise impact. Same with AI. So much of the business model around consumer AI is around chat services, including therapy. And anyway, so 404 Media, one of the best reads out there, found not only are they doing therapy, but they're claiming that these therapy themed bots have credentials and confidentiality. Some of that is kind of harmless fun, and some of that actually ends up being quite dangerous, and there's some lawsuits around that now. So it's a somewhat humorous whiff, but with an edge. Thomas,
and I
really appreciate you coming by. The way, you're always crucial MVP in the chat, and look forward to your next CRM convos, which are usually on Tuesday. Sorry, Brian, go ahead.
I was just going to say this is like a great companion to the one you had last month, which was the bot that will call your grandmother because you're too busy to call her. Yeah.
And you know what's interesting about this though is like you and I were pretty merciless with the grandmother one, because I think you and I kind of share the belief that if you're too busy to call your grandma, then you have a you problem. But in the case of therapy, there are these real issues with shortages of therapists and financial issues with being able to get proper therapy. So the idea of AI playing this type of role sounds like really promising, and yet it can go wrong pretty quickly, because when you talk about like Thomas, you bring up a lot the notion of humans and machines making mistakes and what are the consequences of those. Making a machine making a mistake in a therapy session is a really serious issue. And so anyway, it's tricky, because I think there's an upside to that too. And by the way, there's a great podcast on this topic by Tech Policy Press that I highly recommend about this topic. And they get into the dark side of this and the lawsuits, but also they talk a bit about the potential, because there is potential there too. So anyway, it's a whiff, but it's a story to track. And Brian, here is something that inspires and creates value. I think you have to inspire your dog pretty soon, or you're going to be out of luck.
Yeah, she's definitely telling me we're past dinner time. Yeah, there you go. There's your vocal assessment on it. So I definitely need to go take care of this starving dog. She's got an atomic clock in her gut, and she can tell you within about 3 minutes of when it's dinner time. Yeah, I hear you. Anyway, folks,
What's for
this
dinner,
is a
Brian?
well, it's this lovely looking green blue that we mix up for. This is a 1 year old German Shepherd we got 6 months ago, and when we got her at a shelter, and she was this close to being feral, and it's taken a lot to get her to this point, and but she's slowly coming around. At least I don't have scars all over me. When, like, the first time I tried to put a leash on her, that was like, my God, you're not doing that, dude. Anyway,
Well,
if I can handle this dog, I can handle any client or vendor. So,
yeah, Thomas knows that sound. Yeah.
mhm, yeah.
And and I think that's something that inspires and creates value, Brian. So I think you lived up to your slide. And on that note, I want to thank everyone for coming and spicing up the chat. And we'll do this again in a month's time. And I'm not sure what our special feature will be, but we'll try to come up with something good. Thanks as always for Brian for creating that slide deck, which is maybe not quite as robust as the bond report, but it was pretty damn good, I think.
Anyway, thanks everybody for being on the call. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.